Alright everyone, we're ready to go with the minor improvements tier list. So all the caveats that I listed during the occupations tier list apply. I do not want to repeat all the caveats, but in general we're going to rate this for 4 players, no additional action spaces, in context of the BGA game, and we might end up missing a couple of these by the end of summer when these cards move out of alpha and beta, but the developers are trying their best to get this set in. Some of these aren't available yet, some of them are incoming soon. Maybe I have Discord blacklisted, yeah, Gray. I don't know. The mod is a bot. Yeah. Right, you can DM me links, but I'm not gonna check my Twitter DMs. This is a busy stream for me, so it's already hard to keep up with the chat. I don't wanna like open myself up to doing too much here. Alright, so Beer Tap is the first minor that we're gonna look at. Just as with the occupations, I have an awkward part of the D deck first, and then I have the rest of D deck later. And my D deck knowledge is weakest, followed by C deck, but A and B decks I know pretty well. So take grains of salt wherever you will. Alright, so Beer Tap, you get 2 food when you play it, and then you can turn a lot of grain into not much food. I don't think I'm ever playing Beer Tap unless it's an emergency. I'm almost never going to draft Beer Tap myself. This is at the really back end of D tier. It's really hard to use effectively. Do you really want to turn 4 grain into 9 food? You don't want to do any of these grain conversions. The 1 wood for 2 food part makes it okay. Yeah, if you need to like turn a wood into a food on growth. Yeah. Now for an actually usable card, we have the Brick Hammer. Each time after you build an improvement with at least 2 clay in the cost, you get a stone. This thing can be really strong. I don't think it got playtested enough to have a big enough sample size to show its true power, but my gut says Brick Hammer is really strong. My gut says that Brick Hammer is an A tier minor. You pay a food for this privilege, and it's going to give you like 2 or 3 stone throughout the game. Or more. Like, you can buy a fireplace, get a stone. Upgrade it to a hearth, get a stone. Because one of the ways to pay for a hearth is 4 clay, even if you're not paying it. I think that's how it works. There are a ton of good clay miners. Decent clay miners, costing at least 2 clay, yeah. So it's not worse than A-, I don't think. Maybe it ends up being harder to trigger than I think, but I think this is an A-tier minor. The thing is, Acerbic, this is free. Or it's close to free if you pay a food, which means, like, you can have it down on time. Next up, we have the Cesspit, which costs you a point to play, and you need an Auk and 2 fields when you play it. But it doesn't have to be field tiles. You can have the bean field and a normal field and be able to play Cesspit. And it gives you a clay and a boar on alternating rounds. In lower player count games, like in 2-player games, Cesspit seems absolutely bonkers good. In a 4-player game, clay and boar are worth less. This seems a little difficult to play. The picture of it is a little gross. Not that I'm going to take points away from it for doing that, but it's kind of like horse-drawn boat, but a boar theme instead of a sheep theme. I guess that's kind of exactly what it is. Definitely variable strength based on how your game is going. I can see it being abused, though. I can see it being abused. Like, cultivator, plow, but then what are you doing with the boar, I guess, is the issue. You can't really play this and get too much value out of the boar early. It's going to be really hard to do that, right? So, I think in the end, this gets kind of hard to play, as Gray is saying. Hard to play with a lot of good value. I don't want to put this lower than like a B or a B minus because the upside is pretty high if you find yourself in a good situation. You disagree it's difficult to play. Okay. Well, I think we can agree it's not, like, always playable. I don't know. Maybe I'm just too low on it, but I think it's a B or a B minus. Next up is the Churchyard. If you've played 10 total occupations and improvements before playing Churchyard, Churchyard has to be your 11th or more because 10 is the prerequisite. You can pay a reed and a stone, get a point, and 2 food on each remaining round. So it can be good. I don't think you're really going to see this card played too early, too often. But it definitely has games where it could be really great. So because of its upside, the cost is not cheap. But it's not terrible. It's hard to evaluate just because it's so swingy. Like, some games you might never get it out. Some games, well, yeah, I don't know. Getting 4 food out of it isn't really terrible either. Like, if you play this in round 12, that's still okay. You turned a stone into a point and a reed into 4 food is how I would look at it if you played it in round 12. So, given that as, like, one of the worst situations to find yourself with Churchyard, I think I'm gonna have to say it's a B+. The requirement is already rough. I think 10 cards is actually that rough. Like, it's not easy, but worst case, yeah, that's true too. Civic Facade. If you have more ox than improvements in your hand at the start of each round, or before the start of each round, you get a food. So this is really nice if you're growing early and not playing too many occupations and, like, starting for growth, growing with a miner that stays on your farm. Civic Facade can be pretty good for a few rounds. It doesn't have a high upside. It doesn't come with a point. It does cost a clay. It only gives you trickles of food. But it's not very hard to play, in my opinion, and gives you trickles of stuff. That said, like, the trickles of stuff is not very high. Again, it's just some food. Doesn't come with a point. So, you know, C tier, back of C tier for relatively easy playability and relatively low upside. You think Churchyard is trash, Gray? Do you think playing it in round 12 is bad? And I think part of it is that the cost isn't necessarily high. At least the way I play, I find myself with an extra reed and stone. I feel like a lot more than I want to. Alright, now Dwelling Plan. We have a passing miner that gives you an immediate reno action for a food. Definitely a big early stone enabler. Can be a lot of fun, but it is... Well, I mean, at worst case, it's a renovation out. I think Dwelling Plan's very draftable. It helps you out of the reno queue. I think we are going to get a little less reno pressure just because there's even more incentives to reno early in this set. Just the fact that you have ox and miners letting you. So, you know, I think for overall tactical flexibility, having Dwelling Plan is worth a lot, even if you're not playing it. Relative to other cards you would keep but not play. So I'm going to give this a relatively high grade. I'm going to put this in B tier as very usable, very good to have in your hand. Next is the Field Clay. I don't think I've ever played this card. You need a planted field, you pass it, you pay a food, and you get a clay for each planted field you have. How many clay are you getting off of this card? This feels worse than Clay Embankment to me. The situation's just really weird. Situation here is just really weird. I'm not going to draft this much. We're putting it in D tier. I agree, Dr. Bois. Here we have a high variance card, and I've said it before, I'll say it again, not a fan of the existence of high variance cards, especially when they're minor improvements. I just have a belief that by nature, good Agricola design would involve lower variance minor improvements compared to occupations. And Fodder Chamber, why are you so high variance? You cost so much, you can give so much. You get a bonus point for every third animal in a 4-player game. If you just run a standard collector game, you're going to end up with 13 or more animals, making Fodder Chamber 6 or more points for the cost of 3 stone and 3 grain, which is definitely a lot, but heavily farming-focused games are just so much better with Fodder Chamber. Hard to put this outside of A tier. Gray thinks it's bannable, makes sense. Gray's very good at a lot of game styles, including high farming. The cost is very strong. I'm not opposed to banning high variance cards. I've said for a long time that Carrot Museum, I wouldn't mind seeing it gone for its high variance. For now, we're going to put it near the top of A tier, but I might change my mind later, today or tomorrow. Very dirty, Dr. Bois, I agree. Next is the Forest Well, a very solid minor improvement. Costs a stone and a food, gives you a point back, and puts wood on the next X rounds, depending on how much wood you have in your supply. Big fan of Forest Well. I think this is really solid design. As a, it's a good well theme, the cost aligns with well, and it's low variance. So, checks all the boxes for me in terms of good design. I think it's a good card too. Top of B tier, probably. Middle, top of B tier. And I think that's because I'm going to end up with a lot of stuff that I'm annoyed with in the S and A tiers. Furrows is a passing minor where you sow exactly one field. Would you rather have furrows compared to starting or growing with nothing? I think often you would. Nothing wrong with this design. I think this is great design. I love this kind of card existing. It's not super strong, but it has its purpose. It's completely unobjectionable in terms of strength. Let's give it a C. Super playable. Next is a lawn fertilizer, which is kind of like a free drinking trough, but only for your small pastures. So another card I like the design of a lot. It's completely free. You can play it on start player in round 1. It gives you a small benefit throughout the game. Very unobjectionable, not very powerful. Very minor improvement. This is totally a thing I like seeing in the game. Whether it's good or not, not that good. Like, obviously the effect here isn't that big. But it does make single 1x1 pastures hold breeding animals, and that has good situations. Like, you can fence tighter with this card. So it's not a complete blank. Like, the effect is not blank at all. I think C- probably. The fact that it doesn't cost clay, I think, probably does make it better overall than Drinking Trough. Probably better than Civic Facade. Alrighty, the new market. Each time you take a stage 3 or 4 action space, you get a food. So you're going to want to think about how often you're going to take those spaces. Turning a wood and a clay into a point isn't too objectionable. Getting some food back. I don't know, the wood to a point is okay, and the clay to like 2 or 3 food throughout the game is fair. Like, this is just a fair thing to do with your wood and your clay if they're not doing better things. On the other hand, hopefully your wood is doing better things, so it's not the easiest to justify playing New Market every game. But there's definitely nothing wrong with this card. So, to me, that puts it in high end of C tier, probably. You really want to think about, does your game want you to take boar, veg, cow, and stone off the board, because there are some games where you're not going to want to play this at all, and there are some games where maybe you're incentivized more than usual to take those spots. So, for example, if you're running an animal dealer game, this card's a lot better. All right, so for now we're going to be done with the D deck. We're going to get the end of the D deck later. Sorry, Exotic Dream. I do admit that my content isn't necessarily aimed towards newer Agricola players. I've thought about doing it a lot, but there's so much Agricola material out there. So I apologize and admit this isn't the best for beginning Agricola players. It is definitely aimed more at the intermediate crowd. Alright, so ale benches. Needs 2 ox, costs a wood, and you throw grain away for bonus points 6 times in the game, and you give other players food. Pretty weak. There is a version of this that gives 2 points per grain with basically the exact same effect, called Beer Table. We'll talk about that one probably tomorrow. Ale Bench is not very good. Definitely some Field Watchman type games. It's fine in my opinion. It's definitely easier to play than Wealthy Man, for example. So with this kind of card, you want to make sure you're not throwing away your grain tempo. Like, you don't want to, like, throw away all your grain that you sowed without, like, re-sowing, having enough to re-sow and bake. So it can have its day, but often is pretty expensive. I think that makes it high D based on what I was judging occupations on. If it's rarely good and usually not good, I think that's a D tier. Gary, these cards are horrible for beginners. The cards can be hard to parse. The cards can be hard to parse, yeah, absolutely. Alright, the Asparagus Gift. It requires an unplanted field, but each time you fence a lot relatively early, and relatively means literally, is the amount you're fencing equal to or more than the current round. You get a free veg. Obviously, it's very hard to get more than one vegetable off of Asparagus Gift, but it's a free miner. It's not too hard to have an unplanted field if you're going to fence early anyway, and, you know, a free vegetable on a miner, that's pretty good in the situation where it works. So, because it costs nothing, it's not always playable, but I think its floor is pretty good, so I'm going to give it a C. Right in with furrows. The baking sheet. Each time you bake, you can exchange another grain for 2 food and a point. And you need no grain fields when you play this. So you need to play this either before you sow all your grain or after all your grain comes off. Either one's fine. And it's probably that you want to play this after all your grain comes off your fields and then use this 2 or 3 times. So it's not super hard to play. It does require a high grain game. Hopefully y'all are starting to get a sense of there's a lot of ways to spend grain effectively in this set. And I do think that's going to cause Field Watchmen to get banned. But Baking Sheet on its own, reasonably good. Kind of narrow. Kind of narrow. Baking is not necessarily easy with all this extra grain. So C+ as a combination of playability and value when you can play it. Alright, a very controversial card already, and I think I can agree with the controversy here. Baseboards adds a lot of wood into the game if you know it's in the game. You basically pass baseboards along at the cost of 2 wood or a grain, and you get a wood per room you have. And if you use this in preparation to grow into a room, you get a bonus wood. that's going to be by far the most common way to get the bonus wood here. Or if you like have 6 rooms because you have a big room plan. New crosscut wood, I think I agree. Baseboards, like anything that can give you 5 wood as a miner is really, really strong, especially when the wood comes immediately. If you want to argue this is S tier, I could agree with that. But it's passing, so you're not going to be the only one getting the benefit unless you time it really nicely. Because everyone wants wood, so you really have to play it like late enough so you're the only one getting a benefit out of it, if that's what you're aiming for. So yeah, the annoyance can be bannable. If the community banned crosscut wood for adding too much wood into the game, it's hard to say we shouldn't ban baseboards for the exact same reasons. Yeah, Dr. Bois summarizes my thoughts very well. And probably a lot of the rest of you too. Alright, because we want more grain conversion cards, that's the name of Agricola Revised. Requires 2 grain in your supply and costs a wood, but in the feeding phase, you can just turn a bunch of grain into points and food. At worst, the exchange is 1 grain to 3 food, and then you can stack 1 or 2 grain on top of that first grain to get a bonus point each. This is pretty good in high grain strategies, and a lot harder to justify outside of them. Though, if you're on a game plan where you only have 1 grain, and you sow it early enough, by the time the grain comes off, you're going to have 3 grain, and then you can use Beer Keg to exchange 2 of them for 3 food and a point. Like, that's not bad. So, you know, the playability might be higher. Like, you don't need to play this and get infinite value out of it for it to be worth it. Like, if you play it at the end of the game for 1 or 2 conversions, well, 1 conversion, really, I don't think that's too objectionable as a miner. So the prerec's kind of hard to hit, but I don't know, C plus B minus on this thing, it is a little more usable, I think, than it first appears. Yeah, so Scott, you bring up a good point. Like, that's definitely true. There's a lot more situational cards here. And I think that is something that came up with just like how Uwe was feeling while making all these cards, honestly. But what you're describing from the EIK, lesser used cards taken out, those are lesser used because they just flat out suck, even in the right situations. And stuff like Baking Sheet and Asparagus Gift don't suck in the right situations. So more like the situationally usable stuff in original is more of stuff I'd put in D or F tier, and the situational stuff for revised I'm putting more in like the C tier. I was gonna say something else, but I forgot where I was going with that. I was gonna say this style of cards makes lower draft count more friendly, and when you play lower draft count in revised, you're gonna want to like find ways to use the Asparagus Gift or the Beer Keg late, and it makes you explore the set more. So I do think there are some upsides to this design style. Field Watchman combos everywhere, yeah. The next card is Bucksaw. Bucksaw has a pretty high rating from Play Agricola playtesting. It's just a very solid card. You're turning a wood to play it and a wood each reno for a point and a grain. A point and a grain is pretty good payoff, even if you only get to use it twice. And even if you only use it once on accident, that's not really that bad either. So I'm a big Bucksaw fan. I think it is probably underrated a lot of the time. And I'm gonna slightly hot take this and put it in A-. You think it's okay? Well, maybe I'm not hot taking if I have agreement from someone in chat already. But again, I'm trying to keep my A tier and S tier relatively thin here. All right, maybe I've done a good enough job explaining how good it is. Alright, the Carpenter's Axe, which is one of the many minor improvements that starts with the word carpenters. We're not getting too many of them in this next set because the effects are kind of complicated and hard to program. That's fine with me. The Carpenter's Axe is maybe the least objectionable card that starts with carpenters. It lets you build a stable for a wood every time you take wood and have 7 or more. It's reasonable. You might find yourself having a slightly tougher time getting the wood you need for fences if you play this too early. But, you know, are you ever going to not want to play Carpenter's Axe? It feels usable in a large percentage of games. And the effect is good. It saves you 3 wood if you build 4 stables, because, of course, you have to pay the wood to play Carpenter's Axe in the first place. So, you know, that's a B tier to me. Obviously, if you find stable combos, then it gets better. Here's the Claw Knife, which has one of the more annoying prerequisites of all the minor improvements. Not the most, there's definitely worse things out there. You need exactly 1 pasture, and it only fires off when you take Sheep Market. But it does turn a wood into a point if you have exactly 1 pasture, and maybe you get 2 or 4 food out of it when you take Sheep Market. It puts food on the next 2 spaces. So, pretty narrow card here. Like, are you ever going to play this unless you have mini pasture in this set? I don't think so. Carpenter's bench check? Nope. So, yeah. Hard to use this one. But when you can use it, hard to object to the payoff, also. It's probably too narrow to put in the B tier, though. And it's not like it's a free point. The point costs a wood. The Cob. Not to be confused with the Hod, which we'll see later. The Cob lets you turn grain into 2 clay and a food at the start of each work phase and costs a food to play. Personally, I'm not sure I've ever played Cob. When do you want to turn a grain into 2 clay and a food? Not too often. And you do need a clay in your supply already. I just don't think this is good. Like, I think this is secretly pretty bad. If you draft it and play it, what exactly are you doing? Could you really find nothing else to do with your grain? With all the grain conversions in this set? Yeah, Muddy Puddles activations. But, like, did you also not find a good clay source? There are tons of those. The reason I'm hesitating here is I'm wondering if I should put this in F or not. You know, screw it. I'm putting this in the F tier. I'm never drafting this. I'm never drafting this. Bannable because they really suck? I actually disagree, Cosmo. I don't think we're going to get too many F tiers. Credit is a really fun minor improvement. It loans you food. You get 5 food immediately. You need less than 4 ox, or at most 3 ox when you play it. And you have to pay a food back at each non-harvest round. So you can play this in round 11 and net 4 food off of it late. You can play this on growth to get grow tempo and like figure out your food a tiny bit later. This card has a lot of ways to be valuable. I like that this card exists. I think it's pretty good design. You do risk begging if you fail to get the food, which I think is a fair punishment. Yeah, big fan of this card existing. Has enough good situations. I think it's B or a B minus here. Beggars on accident, yeah. Alright, debt security. Debt security is like Hide Farmer, except you can only hide as many spaces as you have majors, and the cost is fixed at 2 food. There's a lot of good ways to use debt security, especially in plow-type games. Debt security is really good. Pretty strong ceiling on debt security as far as minor improvements go, like 2 food for 3 or 4 points at best. That's pretty good. So, how often are you going to use it is the other question. And I actually don't know the answer for this meta. That's the only thing stopping me from putting this in A tier, is I don't know how often you're going to want to have unused spaces. Doesn't dodge Constable. Well, the thing is, Dr. Bois, in a set with 400 occupations, or that's not true, in a set with like 200-something occupations, Constable is one of those. And it's only 3 points at the end of the day. So you have to be less afraid of Constable with more cards. Let's put it in A. Let's put it at the back end of A. There's a lot of good ways to use debt security. And the fact that you're getting the value of an Ock like Hide Farmer in a minor, you can't undervalue that. Like, what I would say is an average occupation, if you make that a minor, that's a pretty good minor. So that's pretty much what's happening with Hide Farmer here. Good combos, but medium on its own. Yeah, I think the floor is, like, totally fine. Right? Are you ever going to regret trading away 2 food for 1 point? Like, if you end up with just a hearth and 1 unplowed space? I don't think so. I think it's just really good efficiency for points. Fishing combos! We have a drift net boat. The cost is relatively high. You only get extra food from it on fishing. This is like Hutch, but worse. Hutch, but just like definitely worse. C minus? I don't know. Like, some games you're actually going to want to put together a fishing combo, but I don't think this is good. Alright, now here is a high variance card. It's the Facades Carving. If you're a beginner, I apologize for how tough this one is to parse. You're trading food for points, it costs clay, and you need to have wood in your supply, at least as many as the current round when you play it. That's so many weird things. It's really hard to play and get a lot of points out of. The ideal situation for this is that you have a lot of wood at the end of the game for joinery and stables, and then also enough food to drop Facades Carving. And also, by the way, you have to have 2 extra clay sitting around late in the game. Very hard to play for good effect. You don't really want to be converting your food to points too early in the game, because that risks feeding tempo later, which can be really bad. On the other hand, this can be a 4 or 5 point card. So I've seen it work more times than I'd expect on Play Agricola. And based on that, I'm probably going to rate this a little high relative to what many of you might think. It's really hard to say what this does on average because it's totally boom or bust. Yeah, exactly, Cosmo. Like, you can make it work, but I think it's relatively hard. Like, extremely hard to make work, and sometimes when you think it's going to work, it won't. Yeah. Why are fishing cards bad? They incentivize you to take a bad spot, and they throw stuff into the game, which makes the other action spaces better. Also, in 2 and 3 player Exotic Dream, in 2 and 3 player, fishing is a lot better. My ratings here are just for 4 player. That's true too. You'd have to have a card that lets you play a minor after the 6th harvest. That seems pretty tough. All right. Family-friendly home. I do think there's a small typo on BGA. I think they're missing the friendly. Anyway, if you build rooms while already having an empty room, you get a growth and a food. So, very strong effect. This card is basically free. It just needs you to have one Oct down. There are some situations where family-friendly home can be very good. On the other hand, you're opening up spaces in the growth queue for others, so this is just, like, significantly better in late growth. And in my experience, seeing it on Play Agricola, it hasn't been that good. It has been underwhelming in terms of power statistics. Even if it feels like you're doing something strong, it might not necessarily lead to a win sometimes. That said, this card can completely break the game in the right situation. Very hard to rate this card, I think. On average, I'm gonna come in with like a B or a B+. A lot of you might say A, you're entitled to that opinion. One or two of you might say S, you're entitled to that opinion too. I'm not really opposed to banning some of these things that give you growths randomly. I don't think that's a great mechanic to put on cards, but, you know, the revised deck structure has specific spaces carved out for that. Card is a problem? Yeah, the card is a problem. Anything that's, like, sometimes abusable is a problem. Yeah, as I said yesterday, Zach, I think Seducer is a good medium. And, I mean, Phil, definitely you're entitled to that opinion, and I think a lot of people share the opinion that if you're playing Agricola just for fun, especially if it's, like, unrated, just, like, hanging out, there's definitely a lot of people, a lot of play groups which don't mind having, like, hey, I get to grow now as part of the game. So, that's definitely something I'm gonna feel differently on compared to most players. Right, Gray, but, like, you know, Uwe and the designers could have just done a better job designing these, right? We could have a lot more Seducer-type stuff instead of, like, how cheap family-friendly home is. Alright, so just a quick look here. We have maybe about 15 cards left until we get to the first B-deck card, so I think I'm gonna go until we hit the B-deck and then cut it for today. And then tomorrow... Does that work? I actually should probably go a little longer than that today. Because tomorrow I'm not going to have a ton of time unless I start early. Chat, how do you feel about, like, a 3-minute pause here? And go for, like, 20 or 30 more minutes. And then finish it tomorrow. Does that sound good, chat? Because I think that's what I'm going to do, whether you like it or not. We have the Farmyard Manure. So a note on this card, and one of them that's upcoming, is that they are not quite implemented correctly yet. Farmyard Manure puts a food on the next 3 rounds when you build at least one stable on your turn. And it requires an animal to play. The problem is the Agricola official definition of turn is things that you do on an action space. So, more or less, and I think maybe exactly this, you only get to trigger Farmyard Manure when you build stables directly from an action space. And I think the card should probably just say that, if that's the translation of turn. Regardless, that makes Farmyard Manure pretty weak and narrow, requiring one animal on your farm somewhere to play, and giving drips of food, like, twice in the game if you're lucky. So I'm not really going to be drafting it too much compared to other interpretations of in one turn that I think are more natural. I think the official way to read in one turn just makes this very difficult to actually use. So, you know, D or F on this one. I mean, it's 3 free food if you're building stables early enough. Okay. Back of the D tier with you. Feeding dish gives you grain if you have an animal of a type that you're about to take. It's okay. It gives you 1 or 2 food during the game if you're feeding with a fireplace or hearth. Yeah, there's nothing too objectionable to feeding dish, except it does require you to take the same type of animal multiple times, or take an animal type that you've already got via a card. So, given that it's not too difficult to use, it's relatively cheap, it doesn't give you too much during any game, I think we gotta put this in C tier. Next card is the Fire Protection Pond, which, when you go from wood to clay or stone, you get food on the next 6 spaces, but it costs you a food immediately. So the net food is 5. Sure. Are you ever going to regret playing Fire Protection Pond? Not really. Unless you decline to play something actually good. Fire Protection Pond just has very low upside. It has pretty high downside compared to its upside. I mean, the result of Fire Protection Pond is pretty obvious. So, like a C- maybe? Right in with Driftnet Boat, the art companion. Food Basket is one of my favorite cards. It costs a read, it gives you a grain and a veg, it passes to the next player, and the prereq of 2 ox and 2 improvements is a lot of words, but it isn't actually that difficult to hit. Food Basket definitely changes the texture of some games. It means that you're giving an out for crops to someone who might not have a crop out. And you're giving them a relatively playable miner also. Remember that in this meta, the read cost is a lot less prohibitive. Food Basket ends up having some really good stats on Play Agricola, like Strawberry Patch level good. So this is at least a B+ card to me. It probably can't be too much higher than that because it's passing, but Food Basket is something you should be very happy to end up with. Forest Lake Hut is a pretty interesting effect from the A deck. When you fish, you get a wood. When you take forest, you get a food. Both of those seem fine. There's nothing really objectionable to that. The cost of 2 clay makes, enough sense. 2 clay to a point is a fair conversion. So I think this card is fairly playable if you don't have too much stuff to do with your clay. I don't know if buying Forest Lake Hut is better than having tempo on the first fireplace in a lot of games, but maybe it is. So just check that before you play it too early. Sorry, I've got a text from my client here. Let me respond to this. Apologies. Okay, I can... That text was so long. I'll reply to it when we're done here, but yeah, I probably can't take too long with the rest of this. I'd really love to get through some of the B deck, though, because I definitely need to be done within 2 hours tomorrow. Anyway, sorry for that. Forest Lake Hut, you want to be careful about what you're paying the clay, the opportunity cost of paying the clay, and the effect is fine, getting a point is fine. I think this is a solid C+ card. Maybe the top of C+ there. Clarification on Farmyard Manure. No, it only triggers when you build a stable on an action space, basically. So you more or less have to be building stables on the room/stable space. Alright, the gardener's knife is a passing miner that gives you a food for each grain field and a grain for each veg field that you have. So this is very good for high vegetable strategies if you're sowing veggies. Like, this would be really good with Carrot Museum. If you have Carrot Museum and are sowing a bunch of carrots, then you get to play Gardener's Knife for a wood and get like 3 or 4 grain. There are some really good cases for Gardener's Knife, and there really aren't that many bad cases for Gardener's Knife. Because often in the end of the game, you'll have the option to pay this wood for like 2 food if you have 2 grain fields. So I think the floor isn't too bad, especially for its cost. And the ceiling, pretty high. Some grain and some food on a passing miner. So I think this is a C tier card. It has rare high upside. Alright, the Hod, not to be confused with Cob. You get a clay immediately when you play it, and 2 clay whenever anyone takes the Vor space. So Hod is one of the best sources of clay as far as minor improvements go. And it only costs a wood. You can really play it at any time. Hod is pretty useful. Compared to like playing an Ock to get your clay, if you can play a miner to get your clay, I think that's great, personally. Of course, you don't get clay early enough to do early reno, early clay room shenanigans, but it's still helpful. If you have rammed clay or muddy puddles or hard porcelain, this can be good. So I think there's a lot of good ways to use Hod. Just getting a lot of clay from a minor improvement is pretty good value. I think that makes this a B tier card. Next card in the list is Interim Storage. This is a funky one. When you get clay, reed, or stone, you get wood, clay, or reed, and you don't get it immediately. You get it given to you at the start of round 7, 11, or 14, whichever is the one coming next. It does give you some net value, but the 2 food cost can be pretty annoying to hit. I've played this plenty of times, and it usually underwhelms, is my experience with it. So it can surely have some good games, but often it won't be nearly as good as you're hoping, is what my experience says. And for that reason, I think it goes to the back of C tier here. I think it's more playable than a D tier card, but not by much. Maybe better than Civic Facade. Maybe worse than DriftNet Boat, even. This next one is a card with milk in it, but it works differently. This one gives you food immediately, 1 point immediately, has an awkward prereq. So this is kind of a hard card to play, but when you can play it, it's really not that bad. 2 wood is not a small cost, and the point is good, and you get up to 8 food if you have 4 sheep and 3 cows on your farm. But it's not easy to have those animals on your farm when you play this because you need the prereq, which is at least 4 unused spaces. So, very narrow card. I wish it was a little more easy to play, a little less upside. I think that would have made the design better, but this is what we've got. I think this goes kind of similar to Gardener's Knife, actually, in that it's not that easy to play, but has some pretty good upside. The next card is Nest Site, which gives you food at the beginning of rounds if reed wasn't taken the previous round. So this card is actually a good little trickle of early food. I've rarely regretted playing Nest Site. It does cost you a food early on, but you get that food back pretty quick. So I think Nest Site, very solid, not especially good, but if you don't regret playing it, it's certainly better than Fire Protection Pond, right? Which gives you approximately the same payout at approximately the same cost. Nest Site is just better. So, again, I've rarely regretted playing this in stage 1 with not many other options in my hand. And for that, I think it's a C or a C+ card. Now, where did I put Fire Protection Pond? There? Okay. That's probably right. Exactly, Zizak. Very interesting card here, the Potato Ridger. The card is hard to read. It forces you to turn a harvested vegetable into 6 food if harvesting gets you to 4 vegetables or more. And if harvesting gets you to 3 vegetables, you can use the Potato Ridger. So Potato Ridger is very narrow. A veg to 6 food after harvest, before feeding, is a good payoff at a good time. It's just really not easy to get Potato Ridger up and working. You need to be sowing veggies. So D. I think it's just that narrow. Right with ale benches feels right to me. Nothing in S tier. Yeah, I'm probably being a little conservative here. Fodder chamber might be S tier in reality. Baseboards, you could argue if I'm using a band definition as part of my S tier. But we haven't gotten to a lot of cards here. And spoiler alert, the later the card was printed, the more likely it is to be overpowered. So I think that's partly a function of me adjusting for that and better design in the earlier decks. Renovation Company is a miner that lets you reno early. You need a 2-room wood house. It costs you 4 wood, and you get 3 clay and a free reno. What you can do with this is play Conservator and go directly to stone. It's not really the intention of the card, but you're allowed to do it. Renovation Company has some really high upside in play support strategies and Freemason strategies. And, you know, priest strategies, mantelpiece strategies. So, you know, if you're not looking for one of those, you're never going to play Renovation Company. But having Renovation Company in hand enables a lot of really interesting renovation strats. So this class of card is something I like playing. I have a lot of fun playing these strategies, but definitely a little narrow sometimes. It can break games if you have the right combo, though. So I don't know, B minus, something like that. If I put this right along Dwelling Plan, does that make sense? Yeah, the reno is free. It costs a lot more. It doesn't work at any time. Maybe a little worse than this. Alright, Stable Tree is the other, when you build a stable on your turn, you get stuff. And it gets really nerfed if you didn't think about the full consequences of on your turn. And again, I don't blame anyone for not knowing the official definition of on your turn. So enjoy the currently programmed version of it as long as you can. I think the developers are aware that this needs to be fixed. But Stable Tree only really triggers if you're building stables on the build room space and almost no other time. So it gives you very little wood back. It costs a wood to play, so the tempo on the wood's pretty rough. But if you're building stables early, you net a couple wood maybe. Not super impressive here. I think I have to put this in D tier. Like, I'm rarely drafting it, rarely playing it. Well, Zizak, the stable planner also doesn't build stables on your turn. Correct, it's not supposed to work with the card stable. This card in Farmyard Manure really should just be more specific about what it means. This description of on your turn is way too general sounding, even if it's not in actuality. Yeah, it is pretty bad, Phil. So the storage barn gives you a building resource based on if you have the guild or the well when you play it. I don't think much more needs to be said about this. It's kind of situational. If you end up playing it, you're going to be totally fine with what you get back from it. But it just doesn't do much. So even if you do have all 3 guilds, congratulations, you got a passing miner for a wood clay reed. That's worth, what, half a point times 3? In the best case scenario, this is worth 1.5 points EV. I think that makes it a D tier card. We can put it at the front of D tier, though, for being free. Nope, that doesn't work, Zizak. That is not on your turn. Carpenter's Axe is not on your turn, also, because of the, like, completely unintuitive way that on your turn is ruled in the Agricola appendix. I mean, I can show everyone here. It sounds like enough of you are not familiar with that rule. Or it's somewhere here, right? Here we go. The term turn covers all the things a person does on an action space, which may be multiple actions. Many cards provide actions that you can take without placing a person. These are not considered a turn. So yeah, this is the annoying part of the rules that just probably contradicts the effects that the designers intended. I bet the designers intended these cards to work more, but they don't. There you go. That's okay, Zizak. You're not the only one confused. There's people asking about this example and that example, so I figured I might as well just bring out the full rule there. After Storage Barn is actually a good miner here, the Throwing Axe. You can't play it until round 7, but if you take wood when there's pigs on Pig Market, you get 2 food. So this is way better than Mushroom Collector in my opinion. It only costs 1 wood up front and you're not putting the wood on the space for the next player, and you get 2 food when you take wood. Pretty often Pig Market's not going to be taken. Pig Market's only taken at the start of rounds where it's 2 pigs, and sometimes even a whole round where it's 2 pigs. Nobody's going to be taking Pig Market. There's a lot of cards that put boar into the game, so that makes Pig Market open even longer. Throwing Axe usually does a pretty good job of getting you extra food when you're doing a good thing, which is taking wood. So I rate Throwing Axe relatively high. I like it in the B range. You think it's A tier? I don't think it's quite that good. It doesn't come with a point. Trellises. Another card that's harder to parse than you'd like. It's like a well that costs wood, and the amount of rounds is based on how many fences you have built. So this is often good for a wood to 4 food in the late game, because it's hard to get a bunch of fences and then play this until the late game. So I think the value on trellises is usually not very high. Maybe you'll have a game or 2 where you can get 7 or 8 food out of trellises. It is a card that encourages you to fence twice, because you could like fence 7 early, play trellises, and then fence 6 or 8 later, and that works out nicely. But the ceiling on trellises is pretty low. Probably like a C- here. So many new cards to give food. It's incongruent with Cookery Lesson. I'm not surprised, Gray. The designers contradict themselves a lot. But that's good to keep in mind. I don't think we're getting Cookery Lesson here, which is good, because I do think there are rules issues with it. Alright, we'll do some of the B deck here. You were going to do cookery lesson. Ugh. Well, I don't see it here. So I'm fine with what I'm seeing here. Beating Rod. Going back a bit more on topic, Beating Rod is a surprisingly good miner in terms of the power rating that I saw during playtesting on Play Agricola. You get a reed for free, or more often you're turning a reed into a cow. And maybe if you're thinking about it hard enough, you realize how good that is, given that many games here have excess reed. But the Beating Rod is quite strong. I'm a big fan of the Beating Rod. In my very limited alpha experience on BGA and on my Play Agricola experience, I saw this card getting passed around a lot more than I think it needs to be in the draft. Pass this around during the game makes sense, but I think it's a pretty solid card to have in hand. The stats make me want to put it into the A tier. I don't think it's quite that good. I think it's a lot more in line with Food Basket, this other very good passing miner that we had that also cost a reed. But two very good passing miners in this set. Here we have one of my favorite miner improvements from all of ABCD. It's the Brewery Pond. The Brewery Pond comes with a -1, but it needs it. Brewery Pond, very strong. Just requires 2 occupations, no actual cost, and you get a wood and a grain every time you fish or take Reed Bank. So this is Conjurer as a minor improvement, working on twice as many spaces, and the penalties you cost a point. Don't underestimate Brewery Pond. It is super strong, especially on bigger families where the action spaces are pretty bad by your 4th and 5th action. I think Brewery Pond, A tier for sure. Like, probably as good as baseboards, if not better. Yeah. You think the appendix passage can be interpreted in multiple ways? I'm happy to talk with that after I'm off the stream here, Gray. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that, but I don't think I can handle it at this very moment. The next card to look at is Brewing Water, which I've seen plenty of players try to maximize, and if you're trying to maximize Brewing Water, I have questions as to what you're doing. Unless you literally have Brewery Pond, I'm not sure Brewing Water is very good. You get to turn a grain into 6 food on fishing, and the food comes in trickles. On the bright side, this card is completely free to play, so this is better than playing nothing on a minor improvement for start player or growth. So, you know, it's free. How bad could it be? But how good could it be? You need a very specific combo, or it's going to do very little. So this is a D or a D plus that is better than playing nothing. And I don't know if I can say much more than that. Here is a very divisive card, at least with people I've talked to before. It's the Chain Float. It gives you 3 fields for 3 wood, but the fields come in really late. Obviously, if you play this card early enough to get all 3 fields from it, you're sacrificing room parts. So the room parts tempo on Chain Float is pretty huge in my opinion. It's hard to say this is always a good round 1 play, just because the tempo of having 3 wood early is very important. What the stats say is that Chain Float is quite good. The stats say Chain Float is worth the sacrifice most times, and my intuition, with all my experience, with having seen Chain Float played a lot, I still can't tell you if I actually think this is as good as the stats say. Wood Expert would be fantastic for this. But I'm gonna give this a B or a B plus. The stats say it's like an A or an A minus. at least on Play Agricola playtesting. And that might be right, but I have a hard time understanding the 3 wood tempo of this, because there's, well, or I could say I understand it, and I understand it to be very high variance, because if it's an early growth game, you might not be costing yourself tempo on the first room if you get like 8 wood early, but you're probably costing yourself tempo on that second room, and if not, then you're costing yourself fence tempo. So I don't think I'd ever rate this in A tier. I'll definitely agree to it being in B tier somewhere. Sure, on average, let me call it better than family-friendly home. Lots of people think it's very strong, or at least Zach does. I'm saving the S tier, Brindlin. I don't know if we're seeing the S tier today, because I'm probably wrapping up before any S tiers. Yeah, I think I'm not going to be putting anything in S tier today. But oh boy, tomorrow. Oh boy, tomorrow we have, let's say, at least 3 that I'm putting in S tier. The next card is the Chick Stable, which puts 2 food on the spaces 3 and 4 rounds away. It costs a wood or a clay. You're never going to regret playing Chick Stable, or not never, but almost never. The payoff isn't that good, but it's definitely better than nothing. Turning a clay into early food, for example, on an early start player, probably pretty useful. So B-, C+, somewhere in there. It doesn't come with a point, but just the timing and ease of play is worth a lot on Chick Stable, is what I'm going to claim. The next card is Chop House, and it does something pretty funky. It gives you food on future rounds if you're taking grain seeds or veg seeds. It does come with a point, but the situationality of taking those action spaces is not really something you'd like to be doing. You'd much rather like getting your crops from cards. So some games it can be good. Maybe it's good with Field Watchman, but then the cost of Chop House is something to consider. Yeah, not a great card. Hard to say it's that bad, because it can just give you a 2 clay to a point at the end of a game. C+. But don't try to maximize Chop House. That probably means you're doing something wrong. Okay, Clubhouse, a card I like a lot. You turn, hopefully, 2 clay, not 3 wood. 2 clay is such a better cost to pay in a 4-player game. You got a food on the next 4 rounds, you get a stone 5 rounds away, and you get a point. I think Clubhouse is fantastic. It doesn't have a prereq. You should try to draft Clubhouse when you can. I think this is an A tier miner. The Corf is not A tier. It adds stone into the game and costs a read and doesn't give you any points. Furthermore, you have to wait until someone, including you, takes at least 3 stone. So I think this is clearly worse than Stone Tongs. And Stone Tongs isn't amazing on its own either. Which means that Corf in reality, D tier, or worse. I don't remember the last time I drafted Corf. It's possible that I've never drafted Corf, because I like to take cards I'm likely to play late in drafts rather than cards that might have a tiny bit of upside, a tiny bit more upside. What is the upside of Corf even? Who knows? The Crackweeder. The Crackweeder is like Potato Harvester in a miner. It costs a food instead of being an occupation. You immediately get 1 food instead of 3. And the rest of it is exactly the same as Potato Harvester. So, as I've said before, a medium occupation is a good minor improvement if it's the same effect. And because Potato Harvester is like medium or slightly below medium as an occupation, Crack Weeder, by my definition, has to be medium good or good as a minor improvement. So I think I've forced myself into saying Crack Weeder is a B- tier card. What are these names? I don't know. I don't know, Brindlin. I'm sorry. I was definitely not involved in the naming of these minor improvements. Okay, I think we'll end 4 cards from now. We'll end with this one, this plow. The Digging Spade requires you to play it in round 7 or later, which is pretty unfortunate. Because it would be a lot more fun if it was playable earlier in the game. It gives you food when you take clay equal to how many boar you have. It's generally not very good, and its prereq makes it worse. It has games where it can really shine, though. I've seen games where it just gives someone 3 food 3 times, and that 9 food completely helped them with parts of their game. So I don't think Digging Spade is completely awful. It's very situational, but I think it has its purpose in life sometimes. So that puts it towards the higher part of D tier, I think, based on similar reasonings. Potato Ridge is probably better. Excursion to the Quarry. This card is a passing minor, very easy to play. You want to play it on like your 4th growth and then you get 4 stone. Not very balanced. It swings the game a lot. It's pretty good. Like, it gives you stone to reno with or build the well with. I don't like that this card exists. I don't think it's good design. It has very similar problems to baseboard or crosscut wood, except stone affects the game a tiny bit less when a ton of it's injected. So I think I have to put this at the back end of the A tier for overall value. It does give a lot of stuff to you if you play it at the right time. But it passes, so you're giving other people that same opportunity. Hard to judge, but yes, Uwe making things annoying for everyone. Next card here, I really want to see someone use well. This card is the Feed Yard. It gives you animal space, it gives you a point, and if you're not using the Feed Yard for animal space, you get food. And I think that's really the key to making Feed Yard good. The obvious problem with Feed Yard is that it costs you a grain and a clay. But it can give up to 4 food per harvest if you have 4 pastures and don't need extra capacity. I think the upside on Feed Yard I have not seen be discovered. Again, I really want to see someone try to maximize Feed Yard because I think there's a lot here. So I'm going to say this is a lot better than it looks, with the caveat that maybe it's still too hard to play. The obvious problem is that it triggers at the end of harvest. Fair. Yes, it does trigger after you breed, so you can't use the food to immediately feed. So if I'm feeling generous, I could put this in B tier, but I think difficulties with playability and net effect put this closer to a C+ tier. Very swingy. Lawton, you have a good point. You could do 5 pastures with this. But I want to see someone do dirty things with this. Then the last card I'll rate for today is the Forest Plow, which is like Basket, except instead of costing a reed, it costs a wood. And instead of getting 3 food back, you get a field. Pretty solid, I think. You are putting a lot of wood back into the game, but compared to other plows, it's a much lower upfront cost. You pay later. I think I like Forest Plow a fair bit. I think you could rate it as one of the better plows in the game. I've seen a lot of people play it in the few alpha games that I've played, and they seem to do relatively well. It definitely helps with early sowing strategies, but of course it takes away some of your fence tempo and wood tempo. So be very careful who you're giving this wood to, as with anything like Basket or Mushroom Collector. So I think I'm going to give this a B or a B-. It's definitely a solid card, but has a lot of caveats to it. Alright. That is definitely enough for me today. Thanks all for watching. We'll continue this tier list tomorrow. We'll finish it out with the rest of B, all of C, and the back end of D. We'll finally find some stuff to put into the S tier. We'll have some more A tier cards. I'll probably throw some of this D tier crap into the F tier where it belongs. Maybe I'll put some of this A tier stuff into the S tier where some of you might think it belongs. We'll make all those judgments tomorrow. But until then, have a good rest of your day. I'm going to let my voice take a break. Bye. Hope you're all doing well out there on Twitch if you're watching live, on the VOD or YouTube if you're watching after the fact. This is day 3 of trying to create a tier list during my streams for the new cards in Summer 22 on BGA. Yeah. And last we left off yesterday, or 3 seconds ago if you're watching on YouTube, we had just rated Forest Plow into the B tier, or I guess I did, but I'm not going, Jack. No way am I going this year. So let's keep going here. We've got about what is this? 70 or 80 more cards to do on a, well, I'll just count them. 14 times 4, 14 times 5 minus 5, 65 cards to go. 65 cards to go. Let's do this. Then let's check our minor improvements to see if there's a logical consistency. Excited to get stuff into the S and A tier today. We're starting off with the Forest Stone. It costs 2 wood, or preferably 1 stone, and gives you a point back. Requires an Ock. That's not too difficult here. And you basically get food when you take wood, and you basically top up the Forest Stone when you take stone. So it's pretty consistently going to give you like 4 food or more throughout the game if you play it somewhat early. If you play it somewhat late, it might only be worth 2 food, but you know, it's kind of like a little well, paying a stone for a point and getting some food back pretty like dribbly throughout the game, but you know, when are you not taking wood? Only on crazy game plans. So yeah, I agree, Acerbic. It's quite a good card. I draft it pretty highly. The fact that you have to take pay a stone or 2 wood to do it definitely makes it non-A tier in my opinion, but it's definitely in the top quarter, top 20% of cards here. Alright, Forestry Studies only works on the forest action space, and you put 2 wood back on forest to play a free occupation. I'm not a huge fan of this card. It does take 2 food immediately to play, so how many occupations are you playing with Forestry Studies? How free are they? This is definitely like pay a membership cost, get a bunch of free stuff kind of deals you often run into in real life. And not only that, but you're making sure forest is at least 5 next round, and that's definitely not how I like to do things. Now, certainly, you're going to want to take forest a lot, and this helps you get occupations out without further actions, so it definitely can have games where it works really well. I'm not a big fan of it. I think that puts it into the C tier, or a bit lower in C tier. Yeah. Maybe around facades carving, like, kind of similar levels of expense in completely different ways, and somewhat high value in a great situation for it. Representing Oakland, indeed. Makes people start for the 5 wood. I completely agree. Gift basket is a really fun minor improvement. Really like the design of this one. It costs a reed, requires 3 ox, but it gives you a point and a crop, unless you're on 3 rooms or 6 rooms or more. If you're on 2 or 5 rooms, you get a veg. If you're on 4 rooms, you get a grain. Very playable card, this gift basket, especially because that reed cost, again, as I've said a lot through these videos, through these tier lists, that reed is going to be a lot more plentiful now. So, you know, pretty easy to get a point and a crop. That's definitely good value. I think this is B tier or better. Yeah, right around family-friendly home, maybe. Very interesting card comes up now with the Grange. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, but I think it's Grange. The prereq is hard to hit, but it gives you 3 points and a food with no other cost. So you need to have 6 field tiles, so you need to plow 6 fields, and you need to have all your animal types. But, you know, this is 3 points and a food at the end of the game in a good farming game. And, I mean, you've probably watched me enough to know that I like a solid farming game. I'm happy to take plow support. This encourages you to do really good things, and then gives you more points on top of it. So, I think Grange is quite good. It might be a little hard to play sometimes, but the ceiling it offers is definitely solid. And I think I like it right around chain float level, which, you know, you could argue is a little high, but don't sleep on the Grange. Now, what you can sleep on is having a growing farm. So, if you look at what you need to do to play this, it's basically saying, are you playing a big country game plan? And if so, you can pay 2 clay and a reed to get 2 points and some food. It's not very playable. I have played it once. I think that game I had a 8-point big country. So, yeah, it's just incredibly tough to play and justify taking those. The worst part of this is the resource cost. A lot like the original deck miners like Watermill and Corn Storehouse. Like, why does it cost this? And it's just so weird to ever have that many pasture spaces early in the game and also have spare 2 clay and a reed that you want to throw away for 2 points and a stack of food. So, as much as I have a soft spot for building a growing farm, and if you ever successfully play growing farm, it's a Agricola accomplishment. I commend you. We have to F tier this one. It is pasture spaces, so if you fence 8 total spaces, you can play this until round 8. Yeah. And the expend, go ahead and report that bug, absolutely. Okay, Harvest House. I'm a big fan of Harvest House. Its cost is a little awkward. Its prereq is a little awkward. The prereq is that you have to play as many occupations exactly the same as the number of completed harvests. If you want the food, grain, and the vegetable. You can always play Harvest House, turning in wood, clay, reed for 2 points. But Harvest House is really amazing in stage 1 before you've played an occupation, so where your equal is 0 and 0, or in the mid-game, like stage 4 where you have 3 ox played, stage 3 where you have 2 ox played. Harvest House is really great. I actually think this is... Well, I was going to say A-, but can I really grade it too differently than Beating Rod and Gift Basket? I don't think I can grade it too differently than these. So... yeah, let's put it at the top of B tier. And again, as I said yesterday, or earlier if you're watching on YouTube, I'm probably going to shift things up a little, but... You'd put Harvest House in A tier? Fair. Hauberg. 3 occupations and 3 food. But what you get from the Hauberg is really great. You get 2 wood twice and 1 boar twice, alternating in the order of your choice. Hauberg has, you know, really, really solid value as long as you're not messing with your own food tempo too much. You can accidentally starve yourself if you tunnel vision onto Hauberg, but you just have to do slightly more than tunnel visioning on Hauberg. You have to make sure you have food, and then you can tunnel vision on Hauberg, and you'll do great. I think this card's very good. So, I don't know about A tier, because it's a little tougher to play than that. But it's close. It's really close. I mean, I'm very likely to just, like, move 5 of these things that are leading the B tier into the A tier by the end of this game. Or, I keep saying game, because that's usually what I'm streaming. Okay, Hawk Tower. Hawk Tower is super fun, and a fantastic card to play on a small stone house strategy. You get, basically, room to grow in round 12. You just get a stone room for the cost of 2 clay. The prereq is that you have to claim that you're doing this in round 7 or before. But with all the early Reno cards in the game, if you find yourself having a couple stone house occupations, which are diluted now, Hawk Tower can be really strong. Now, the statistics I've seen during Play Agricola playtesting hint that Hawk Tower is not quite as good as it appears, which I find very confusing, because I think people are just misplaying it most of the time. In the right situation, Hawk Tower is awesome, and I think that's, like, fairly obvious. And I really think it's that the prereq is significantly tough, and the 2 clay is not inconsequential. I think this card is, like, surprisingly well balanced for a miner that gives you a stone room. And the stats I've seen are biasing me to say I can't put this in the A tier. Yes, exactly, Rainier. People play it more than they should. Exactly. So, there's so many, like, B+ cards to me here. Okay, the Hook Knife. You have Plowdriver Housebook Master? Well, yes, obviously it's going to be great with Plowdriver Housebook Master. The Hook Knife says, we're going to look at the 4-player. Once you have 6 sheep on your farm, you get 2 bonus points. Nothing particularly bad with this. You pay a wood, you get 2 points if you are doing something somewhat rare, but not super rare. I think this is, like, a good design, and definitely valuable in the right situations. So, B-, I think. B-, C+ is what I've been giving that kind of situationally pretty good. Alright, it's time to break the seal, y'all. I have been very hesitant to put anything into the S tier, but Kettle is something I think was a bad idea to design and didn't get fully caught in playtesting. Kettle costs 1 clay. You need to have a grain field at any time. The trick, I think, to Kettle is ignoring the 2nd and 3rd options. If you just pretend Kettle only says the 1st option, at any time you can turn a grain into 3 food. Literally any time. Like, you sow 2 grain with Field Watchman in stage 1, you play this, you harvest your grain with Kettle on, and you have 6 food. I think this is busted. You just ignore the fact that you can trade in 2 grain for a food and a point at 2 different levels. Because 2 grain for a food and a point's not great. But if you just do the 1 grain to 3 food at any time, I think that's dumb. I want to say Kettle was either easier to play or even better during the start of playtesting the B deck, but I don't remember for sure. I don't think this is good design. I think this is silly. Anytime, like, the anytime cards are just, you really have to be careful with the conversion you're offering as a design issue. Anyway, to maintenance premium now. You basically get food when you take wood, similar to Forest Stone. This one doesn't cost a stone, it doesn't give you a point, it needs one more oct to play. And you don't have, like, a maximum, or you do have a maximum cap on maintenance premium as opposed to Forest Stone. Forest Stone, you could theoretically, like, take stone a bunch and have, like, 10 food sitting on Forest Stone. Maintenance premium is capped at 3, but it stocks back up to 3 when you reno. It's hard to say you're gonna not get value out of maintenance premium. It's very, I think, easily 4 food throughout the game, and it's free, so, you know, where does that put it? It's chick stable, but slower, and I put chick stable right here. So definitely nothing wrong with drafting maintenance premium and playing it. I think, you know, somewhere in the C+ land is fair. Kettle S and Whiskey Distiller B. Fair, Gray. Whiskey Distiller is also any time, right? But the timing on Kettle gives you the food immediately, and the Whiskey Distiller you have to plan ahead. Like, you can't be converting round 14 grain with Whiskey Distiller, and you can't, like, do sown stage 1 grain with Whiskey Distiller to feed yourself in stage 1. So maybe I'm overvaluing that, and of course, I like to rate miners that do the same thing as occupations as tiers higher, 1 or 2 tiers higher, so. The mill wheel is pretty specific. Each time you use grain utilization when fishing is occupied, you get 2 extra food. I think I've only played mill wheel when I have 2 wood lying around at the end of the game and need a point action. Or if I have no other miner to play and I have a strong feeling I'll have enough wood this game. And, you know, that's a risky feeling to have. At worst, this is 2 wood for a point, and, you know, things could be worse than this. But really, you're gonna hope someone has a fishing combo, and you're gonna use sow after someone activates their fishing combo? C-. Yeah, Gray's correct. Saving the bake actions and buying a baking implement is a huge deal. Alright, Muddy Puddles. Not a big fan of the design. It's fun, but I think it just offers a lot. And it offers a level of things that minor improvements, you know, shouldn't really offer. That said, Muddy Puddles does cost you a lot. It does cost 7 clay. You have to have 7 clay that you're sinking into the Muddy Puddles. But the fact that you can get animals and food by playing a miner and spending clay throughout the game feels, you know, very strong. The stats say that people try too hard, or my interpretation of the stats says that people try too hard to get maximum payoff from Muddy Puddles. And what you want to remember is that these animals are not breeding pairs. So you're not going to be able to only rely on these unless it's like a lake growth game, you had a big stone house strategy, and this is your stock man. Surely this is better than stock man in a lot of situations. Not all situations. It's definitely a good combo with stock man because it gives you 1 of each thing, and stock man gives you 1 of each thing, for example. But yeah, the clay cost, don't be fooled. It's really expensive, and it gives you a lot of stuff. And, you know, I'm not a fan of that kind of design when it comes to minor improvements. I think I have to give it an A- just because of the sheer output here, but don't stretch too hard for it or you might ruin your own game. The new purchase is heavily emergency crop source. It's kind of like Seed Trader as a free miner, so if you just treat it that way, with, you know, you don't have flexibility on the timing like you do with Seed Trader, but I don't think that's too big of a deal. You can only use this in rounds 4, 7, 9, 11, 13, and 14. or rather, right after the previous round ends, before those rounds start. And it can be a little awkward to have food in those rounds lying around because you're about to do feeding. But, this is a free minor improvement. It gives you crops if you have enough food. There's definitely nothing wrong with playing this early in the game, hoping to trigger it once or twice randomly in the mid-game for some extra grain. New purchase can be good in the right situations. It's definitely not a problem to play. Like, obviously it's not a problem to play. No prereq, no cost. How does it rate to other free miners, like Furrows, Asparagus Gift? I think it's better than those. So I think this is a mid-C tier card. But obviously you don't want this to be your only crop source that you try to fire off too early, because, be careful with your food. The Potter's Market is a really strange vegetable source. It costs you 2 wood, and it gives you a point back. But you have to pay 3 clay and 2 food to get a veg on the next 2 spaces. Now, certainly, this is abusable if you have something like Clay Carrier and, a veg conversion. So there are ways to really abuse Potter's Market, but they're pretty rare. Again, I don't think this is good design, very expensive things that could give you a lot of stuff, but it isn't overpowered. That is certainly... I feel very confident that this isn't overpowered in general. It's just very hard to make this busted. I do think it can be busted in very narrow situations. So when are you ever going to want to play Potter's Market? It's probably in like 10 to 20% of games where it really does a lot. Otherwise, it's mill wheel. You're trading 2 wood for a point a lot of times. So I don't think I can say this is that much better. I think this is C or C minus, somewhere in here. I don't actually know where I'd put it specifically because it's just a gigantic mass of stuff. The Reed Belt, in my opinion, a lot better than Reed Pond. It doesn't need 3 occupations being the main thing, and the reed comes in at specific times that I think are very good times to have extra reed coming in. Round 5 reed, that's for a room. Round 8 reed, that's for a room or an early-ish reno. Round 10 reed, round 12 reed, those are great times to have a reed coming in for a renovation. I think Reed Belt's very strong, and compared to Toad, better than Toad. Toad, you are forced to play it in round 1 to get 5 reed out of. You're forced to play it by round 3 to get 4 reed out of. Reed Belt, you can play it in round 4 for 4 reed. You can play it in round 7 for 3 reed. Way more flexible. Doesn't have an Ock prereq. The 2 food can be a little annoying in the early game, so watch out for that. But I think this is an A tier card. I'd put it ahead of Muddy Puddles, probably. Just the timing of getting these reed is really good. Scales gives you 2 food if after you play a card onto your farm board, you have the same number of occupations and improvements. You want to have like a balance of total occupations, total improvements, majors and minors combined. It doesn't work on passing minors, or at least it shouldn't. And it is a card where you're often going to be taking 3 wood into start player round 1, into an Ock round 2. And, is it worth that? Absolutely. The amount of food you get off of scales, you do have to be a tiny bit careful, but it's pretty easy to get 8 or 10 food somewhat early off of scales. And you can absolutely get 14 or even 16 food off of it in perfect situations. I think I've seen 12 quite a lot on Play Agricola playtesting for people who are trying to make the most out of it. And, hunting this 2 food on scales can often be worth it. I think taking time to really think through your sequence of Ocks and minors can seem difficult, but I think it's more doable than some of you might think at first. So, scales very good. Don't pass it too far in the draft. I think it's a clear A tier card. Play Agricola playtest stats said it was very good. Fact it counts majors makes it better? You mean stronger? I don't know about stronger. Sculpture course. At first, sculpture course I thought was pretty weak. And then I was playing with some friends and was shown that sculpture course can be an excellent way to turn early stone into food. You obviously don't want to be spending your only grain that you're expecting to get for most of the game on sculpture course, unless you have a ridiculous amount of stone. But the payoff for sculpture course, it's stone carver, but a minor improvement. You can't use this in stage 6, you can only use this 5 times throughout the game. But, no, that's not true. You can use it in round 5 and round 6. You can use it in rounds 1, 2, 3 also. Not sure how you'd ever be able to use this in round 1, but yeah, I mean, you could use this, what, 7 times throughout the game? In the perfect situation? And if any of you have played in these alpha games so far, you've probably seen a lot of them with a big influx of stone. Sculpture course can be half of a feeding engine, honestly. And I like it a lot more than stone carver. Even though it costs a grain, it's a minor improvement instead of an occupation. I do ascribe some value to that. I'm going to put this in B, or B- tier. I would encourage a lot of people to try the sculpture course, see how good it is. Storehouse Keeper combo? Yeah, kind of. I think it's more combo-y with cards that give you a bunch of early stone. Okay, the Stockyard is a fun card. I do like the design of this one. This is mini pasture, except you're not passing it. And, like, kind of better. It can hold 3 animals of the same type, so breeding pairs and the space to breed it. It does cost a wood and a stone, but it gives you a point back. I think it's very balanced, very solid card. I think this is a classic B tier card. Just because it has a lot of good utility. The Store of Experience. The Store of Experience will give you a building resource based on how many occupations you have left in your hand. It usually gives you a stone, but sometimes you could play it without having an occupation played, and you can get a wood. You don't really want to use it for a clay. Using it for a reed seems fine, but you have to have exactly 2 occupations when you do that. You know, it's fine. It's a passing miner. It doesn't do that much, but it can do useful things in the right situations. Is this a jump? Oh, Stockyard is a sheep stealer, absolutely. Yeah. You're looking at Stockyard as a collector stage 1 cow enabler? Oh yeah, absolutely. Animal teacher stage 1 cow enabler also. Early cattle doesn't work, unfortunately. Alright, Store of Experience I think we're putting in the C tier with some other useful passing miners. Probably has a little, or same utility as like a sow action maybe. A 1 field sow action. Tasting! You can turn a grain into 4 food before playing an occupation on lessons. But otherwise you're just spending 2 wood for a point again. And given the other grain conversions that we've all seen, are you really gonna pay for this card? My vote is save your grain for a better conversion or for points, because this is not great value. I'm putting this straight in with Mill Wheel. Maybe a little better than a Mill Wheel, but generally this is like 2 wood for a point. The card is almost blank, honestly. Maybe in some games you don't find a better grain conversion, but that's sad. Upscale Lifestyle is possibly my favorite early Reno card. It costs 3 wood, it passes, but you get 5 clay and a reno action, which you do have to pay for, but, you know, you're getting 5 clay, so you're almost never going to be unable to reno to clay if you play upscale lifestyle. It does huge things in clay supports games because, you know, you're getting clay to build your clay rooms. I mean, honestly, you don't need clay supports for upscale lifestyle to be good. There's a lot of ways for this card to be strong. So, have I rated any of these other reno things yet? I have. Dwelling Plan gives you a reno. Renovation Company gives you a reno. I think it's slightly better than these. But that's just personal opinion. It could be clouded by other things, but 3 wood to 5 clay when you want to reno can be pretty useful. I mean, think of it as a conversion, Merrick. You're converting 3 wood to 5 clay when you want to reno. Almost always to clay, unless you have like hard porcelain or stone clay firer. Value assets, free miner improvement, small value. After each harvest, you can buy a wood for a food, you can buy a reed or a stone for 2 food. I don't really know when you'd want to buy a clay, but, you know, you can. So, I guess in 2-player games you definitely want to, but we're ranking for 4-player here. Value assets, free miner. I like this design. Easy to do, not too overpowered. It's like impossible to make this thing overpowered, right? You can buy 6 things max during the game. So, right along with new purchase, I think. I think it ranks right along with new purchase. As, you know, it's free. You're going to get a tiny bit of value from it. You liked upscale lifestyle fill because it helped you snipe the fireplace. Oh, true, yeah, it does give you enough clay to easily afford a fireplace and an early reno. Alright, the wage. So wage is a passing miner, and it gives you 2 or 3 food. And it's not usually going to be more than that. If you want it to be more than that, you either have guilds or ovens or both. You know, don't make too much of this card. Don't try to maximize it. But a passing miner to give you some food tempo for, like, whatever reason you want, really. Can't be that bad, but it also can't be good in the average. Like, I can't give it more than a C tier is what I mean by that. I think just put it right alongside Asparagus Gift and it's fine. 2 food's definitely not a lot, but you get it immediately. Woodpile throws some wood into the game. You get wood equal to the number of people you have on accumulation spaces. So it's not ever going to be, like, too overwhelming too early. So, like, you're never going to be able to get 4 wood from this thing in round 6. So, I think this is about as much wood as a minor improvement should throw into the game, and we're going to see a couple, if we haven't already, that do more than this. So it can be pretty good. Like, a minor improvement that you get 2 or 3 immediate wood from in the mid and late game, that's pretty strong. So definitely don't underestimate the wood pile. It's just that there's a lot of things that make wood pile seem tame by comparison because of bad design. I think this is on the edge of good and questionable design. Beating Rod's probably... I don't know. I don't know how I'm going to rate it compared to these other 2 great passing miners. Probably a tiny bit lower, but if you want to argue the opposite, I can't really fight that too much. Abort Oriel. Someone, I think it was Acerbic was asking me what in the heck does this card mean. So I'm sure a lot of us are having questions of what the name means. What I've gathered is that Oriel is like a bay window, and abort is a really bad Google Translate experience for breaking away or breaking off. So we see what looks like the structure for a bay window, but there's no actual window, so I'm guessing that's the right meaning of this card. Anyway, let's talk about how good it is. You can no longer play this card when any player has 5 or more cards in front of them. It costs 2 clay, gives you 3 points. You have to, like, lose the fireplace race to have, like, 2 clay lying around, or you have to be taking the 4 clay and buying a fireplace. It definitely can be pretty good. Like, that cost to conversion is pretty good, but you might be planning for it, and somebody might be throwing out cards like crazy because they have Lantern House or they think they do, and then this card is unplayable. So, relatively high ceiling for a minor improvement, but it's a card style that I don't like to force. So I might draft this later than its overall strength might entail. So if it was easier to play, this would be an A. But I think the playability factor drops it all the way down to a B- for me. Yeah, I'm gonna go with that. Similar to Cesspit, maybe. Hey, Triple Eins. Abort means toilet in German. Oh! Is this a toilet window? That's really good knowledge. Wait, what do you think, chat? Is this a toilet window? Or just a toilet in the shape of an Oriole window? Oh my gosh. Do y'all remember the outhouse in original Agricola? Same theme of the card, you get points early, but you have to do it early? Oh my gosh! It's a toilet window! Thank you, Triple Lines. You have revolutionized the world's understanding of this card. That is amazing. That's amazing. This is Outhouse revised. Problem, you have to play it. Good point, Merrick. Great adventure we have while making tier lists. All right, bed in the grain field. We start off. I guess Abort Oriole was the start of the C deck, but here's the second one, I think. Bed in the grain field. At the start of the next harvest, you get a family growth with room if you have space. It requires 1 grain field. So, can you get a room and a grain field and play this card and guarantee growth in round 4? Is that possible? Because if it's possible, that's really annoying. And feed. Well, you're getting at least 1 grain to feed with. Let's see. Let's do a thought experiment, chat. I actually haven't thought about this too thoroughly, even though I've had this card in circulation for a while. Let's see. What do you want? You want Cord Maker, or to take 1 grain. Because I don't think you can get, like, wood and grain or reed and grain together. Cord Maker, reed, wood, plow, sow, miner, build. Ooh, young farmer. Well, then I think we're just, like... Maybe young farmer makes this work. Wood, reed, build. Plow, young farmer, major, bed in the grain field, grain sow, feed. There is also the occupation that lets you trade clay for grain and counts as a field, and you can sow in that. That saves an action too. So the fact that there are lines where you can grow in stage 1, I want to kick this card to the curb just because there are enough situations where you can make it work. why not just say, you know, round 5 or later also? I've recommended to the publishers so many times that all these extra growth actions be restricted to round 5 or later, and you know, what gets published? This stuff. Yeah, it also, as Ace Spade says, you can double build and try to use it in stage 2 a lot more easily. I think there are a lot of ways to make this card abused. Yeah, it's not bad for a stage 2 growth either, especially if it's like a late growth game. Yeah, okay, let's not get it wrong here. This card is not easy to play, but it's not super hard either. And it only gives 1 growth, but 1 growth can be game-breaking. I think I would have never said this before, thinking through more carefully. I think I want to put it in like the A tier or A- tier. It just breaks the game that many times. I would suggest banning it if we want to ban Little Peasant. It's definitely not as game-breaking as Little Peasant can be, but I don't know. Maybe this is a little hot and too high, but I don't know. Value your growths, especially when you can... If you can grow in round 4, no. Bad. Bad card design. The beer stall is next. In each feeding phase, for each unfenced stable you have, you can turn a grain into 5 food. I think this is way better than the occupation that can give you like a couple bonus points for sinking grain when you have unfenced stables. This benefit seems pretty good. You only need 1 unfenced stable most of the time. So... this can be pretty strong in the right situations. It's going to be hard to use this in stage 1, obviously. Like, when are you going to have an unfenced stable and a grain field and time to play beer stall? Not very often. Definitely less than bet in the grain field. So, it can give you, like, for 2 unfenced stables, 2 grain to 10 food a couple times in the mid or late game, and that seems really super strong as a minor improvement instead of playing an oven and baking and stuff like that. So I think Beer Stall has some pretty high potential. I think it's a B tier card because sometimes it's useless, but sometimes it's very strong. And the replacement value for Beer Stall, like there are so many ways to convert grain to food. Let me put it ahead of Forest Plow even. I think it has just really high ceiling. Yeah, Cosmo. I've been on that train for a long time. Speaking of grain conversions, so maybe the first card we rated was Ale Benches. Beer Table is literally Ale Benches, except you can have a second point, and the prereq and cost is a tiny bit different. This is a terrible design. It can be worth 12 points, but it actually doesn't win too much if you try to get all 12 points off of it, or I've seen people mismanage it a lot. But really, I don't think this card should exist. And I don't think it's too hard to agree with that. Pay a grain, have 2 points at the end of the field phase. I mean, it's kind of awkward to play, but no grain in your supply could be after you've sown all your grain. Yeah, I think this is S or A plus tier. And I think we can make a case for, like, banning it if we wanted to. Next up is the Blade Shears, where I think I've heard a few people be confused about what the value is, but if you have a pasture, you can pay a wood and pass this card along, getting either 3 food or 1 food per sheep you have. So the minimum is 3, but if you have more than 3 sheep, you can get more food off of Blade Shears. Harder to play than Wage. maybe a slightly higher upside than wage. Not that great, but, you know, can go off in the late game for 6 food if you are in the right situation and want to pass a miner for a wood. Late game emergency feeding, maybe. Where did I put all these passing miners? This is probably the worst one out of this group of, you know, free cards that don't do too much. Beer table, you can get 6 or 8 if you grow in stage 2 or 3. Right. But, you know, don't play it too early. Don't sink your grain into it too early, but otherwise, you know, go crazy. Christianity, very interesting. You need exactly 1 sheep, so early fireplace strats make this pretty playable. You're giving everyone else a food, but you get 2 points. Pretty solid, I think. It's not amazing, because giving other players even 1 food is a little complicated. Please forgive me here. I have a call from a client that I need to take. We're ready to go again. The Lumin lifestyle, right? It, like, I wouldn't really trade it for anything, but that might be the first or second time ever where I've taken more than 10 minutes out straight in the middle of a stream. All right, how are y'all doing, chat? Are we ready to go back here? Thanks for your patience. I appreciate it very much. We're in the middle of Christianity here. where we're giving everyone else a food in order to get 2 points when we have a sheep. A little conditional, can't be too hard to hit in some games, but in some games, you know, you're not really going to want to have exactly 1 sheep. So where would I put this? Probably a C+. Yeah, probably better than Forest Lake Hut. Okay, a card that I think could be pretty exploitable here. It's the Clay Deposit. It does cost 2 clay, which is more than it cost during playtesting. And you basically put a clay back on a clay space and get a point. And that seems pretty good. Like, when are you taking the exact amount of clay you need? Now you can just take bigger stacks of clay. I think that Clay Deposit has a big potential. I think Porter-style strategies make Clay Deposit really good. Clay Room strategies make Clay Deposit pretty good. That 2 food is the only food you're paying it, and then you're making the clay action spaces a little better. Who's going to care in a 4-player game? So I think Clay Deposit's quite good. I would draft it pretty highly in many situations, even if it ends up being, you know, 2 points throughout the game. So, you know, I think that makes it B+. You do need specific things to make it really go off, but at worst, it's probably worth something. So something like Hawk Tower, Chain Float, that kind of thing, Clay Deposit. Let's stick it right in there. Do you have enough grain conversion cards? Yes? Well, here you can have another one. For a wood into clay, you can get a point and put a grain into the Corn Schnapps distillery to get a grain food on the next 4 rounds. So compared to some other conversions, this is definitely worse. It is more expensive, and it only works once per round. But it can be better than nothing in rare situations. I'm not a big fan of this card. I don't think it's that good. Yeah, it has a lot of situations where you'd much rather just be playing something else. Sure, there are some games where you might have a spare grain and 2 clay. Clay Kneader comes to mind as something that's exact benefit from the occupation pays for this miner, and it has a linked benefit. Even then, I don't know how good Corn Schnapps Distillery is. I'm thinking C-, D+. Yeah, probably similar to ale benches. Like, you don't really want to play this. Next up is the early cattle. There are many ways to get early cattle, and this is probably one of the worst ones. the fact that you have to pay 3 points, you can't use like stockyard or livestock feeder to hold the cows, you have to have a pasture in order to play the card. I've yet to see someone destroy a game because they were able to play early cattle. And I don't think it ever is game-breaking. In the right situation, maybe this is pretty helpful, but often you're just not going to want to play it. It's really hard to fit into a draft and a game plan, because by the time you're going to have a single pasture or more easily, it's going to be stage 3, and by then you're only a stage away from seeing cows come on the board and you have to pay 3 points. You have to get a lot of breeding cows to make up for 3 points, I think. So I think I'm going to put this in D tier. It's really hard to justify this as valuable enough. The elephant grass plant got a significant nerf after playtesting. During playtesting, the elephant grass plant was giving 2 points per reed after each harvest, and it was just completely silly that way. But now it's two clay and a stone, lets you convert a reed to a point after each harvest. I think it's not overpowered now. It's kind of weird that you'd want to convert a reed to a point, but, you know, maybe there's the right game for it. It does cost something significant. It costs 2 ox prereq as well. Can't say elephant grass plant is that good. Maybe it gives you some extra points in the late game, but the cost is kind of high. Like, the cost to get 2 points is 2 clay, 1 stone, 2 reed. I think that makes it a C- card. Is Madonna in revised? No. Eternal rye cultivation. I believe there is some ambiguity in the current wording of eternal rye cultivation. It requires a grain field, and after each harvest, in which you have, I think it's supposed to be 2/3+ grain in your supply, you get 1 food / 1 grain. I'm not sure why they worded it this way. I think it would be clearer if they just used the slashes. I believe the reasoning why they don't use the slashes because they don't want people confusing it with 2/3. Yeah. Anyway, you get extra grain if you have 3 grain in your supply. You get an extra food if you have 2 grain in your supply. It's not doing too much. It can be okay. It's free. It only requires a grain field, which is most of the time you'd be hunting the rewards anyway. So, a little narrow in terms of actually getting good value from it. But sometimes, like, getting a double harvest off of 1 field effectively could be good. Well, let's put this in the C tier. I think it can't be that bad in high grain strategies. Next card we're looking at is Farm Building. Each time you build a major, you get a food on the next 3 rounds. And it turns a clay and a reed to a point. I think that's a relatively fair conversion. It might be a little expensive, but you're getting food. You can buy a fireplace, upgrade it to a hearth, get 3 food twice. With some guild strategies like Blueprint, you might be able to trigger it even more than that. If you have a bunch of stone, farm building might be good too. It's not easy to play in the early game because the cost is like half of a reno to clay, or like some room parts. So, I don't know. Like, the cost can be pretty annoying in some situations, but you're gonna get some output from this card pretty often. I think this is a fine card. Probably C+ tier, if not B-. You know, I put Chick Stable, which is, I think, similar enough. We can put this ahead of Chick Stable in the B- tier. It does a pretty similar thing. Okay, the Garden Claw puts a food on the remaining spaces up to 3 times the number of planted fields you have. So if you have 2 planted fields, you can play this and get a food on the next 6. If you have 3 planted fields, you can play this and get a food on the next 9. It does seem like it's only really a combo card for early crop strategies like Field Watchman. And if we're considering banning Field Watching, I think the use of Garden Claw gets, you know, even more questionable. You really want to have 2 planted fields or more when you play this. And to know that you're going to have that strategy during the draft is a little hard to predict. Yeah, I agree, Merrick. It's really hard to get more than... It's somewhat hard to get more than 6 food off of this card. But a wood to 6 food, that's good, right? Paying a wood to get food on the next 6, that is good. So, a little too narrow to be actually good on average, but back of the C tier sounds fine to me. Fifth to 7th pick combo piece, I think that's a very good evaluation, Ace Spade. You don't want to treat it bigger than that. Greening plan, as y'all probably have figured out by now, I don't like the idea that a minor improvement can give you 5 points. I think that is just silly. I don't think this card is too hard to plan for. You have to have your grain sown by stage 4, your veg sown by stage 5. A bunch of fields gives you a bunch of points. For the cost of 3 food and the potential to get 5 points in a 6-field game plan, this is way too good. Kind of just want to throw this in S tier, honestly. Miners shouldn't be this good. Yeah, let's stick it in front of beer table. I don't think I can regret that. I think it's that good. Draft greening plan very highly. Hope to get some plow support. And, you know, in a worst case scenario, hopefully you have 2 unplanted fields for 1 point as your 3 food cost, which is kind of expensive. Hey, June, you played it twice and it was really good. Yep. It can be a monster. I think you should not sleep on the greening plan. You should try to make it work. The hardware store. You might think that getting wood, clay, reed, stone on day labor is good. But what you're doing is that you're throwing away the effect of day labor itself. You're not getting the food from day labor anymore when you play this. And I think that's deceptively bad. I also think the cost of it is really annoying, because you pay a wood and a clay in order to later get the benefit of getting wood, clay, reed, stone. I am not going to play Hardware Store very much. I don't expect to. I don't expect this card to end up being good if there are ever statistics on it. I've seen some people play it and their games go underwhelmingly. I don't recommend trying for Hardware Store plans. There's an occupation in the original game in like the Belgium deck called Tinkerer, where you're creating your own wood, clay, reed, stone space. That card's pretty bad. I think this card is very similar, also pretty bad. I'm putting this in the D tier. Like, maybe you have enough day labor good stuff, but you really want food when you're taking day labor. Heart of Stone is a card where I've seen it played once. And that was like 2 days ago in a game in alpha mode. I have not seen anyone play it on Play Agricola. I've never seen someone play it in a live game in person. You get a growth with room action when stone is revealed, but you don't get the child until the next round. That 4 food is pretty expensive. I don't think this card is overpowered. Stone obviously comes out relatively the same time as family growth. And you need to, like, commit to Heart of Stone. So I don't think Heart of Stone is very good. Given the fact that the revised deck structure needs family growth cards, I think they should look like this, where they are high cost. So this card's not very good in average results, I guess I would say. I don't even know if I can put it in the C tier. I think it might even be a D tier card. But I will allow that it can be good in the right situation. I just haven't seen it yet. You know, actually, I'll give myself some credit here. I've seen enough games involving the C deck. The fact that I haven't seen it be usable says enough. That says enough. Heart of Stone, middle of the D tier. Now we have the Mandolin. So, you know how this set comes with, let's say, a few extra vegetables, or Revised in general comes with a few extra vegetables? Yeah, imagine creating a card that lets you turn a vegetable into a point and 2 food. And also imagine being the designer of this card and not putting in the once per round clause and just making it anytime. Imagine being that designer. Yeah, anyway, playtesting changed that. So, Mandolin's still pretty good. There are a lot of games where you can throw away your vegetables for a point and 2 food, because the vegetables are basically worth a point on their own, so you're just netting food out of it at worst. But you can go into heavy vegetable strategies and get a ridiculous payout from them. Mandolin, I think, is A- tier. It has a lot of situations where it's busted good, and, you know, some games it might not do anything, but don't pass this along too much. Let me put it between Muddy Puddles and Bed in the Grain Field for now. But I do think Mandolin can be a little busted. The Mineral Feeder costs a read and gives you a point, so that trade seems okay in the abstract. And at the start of each round, you can get a grain if you have at least 1 sheep in a pasture. So how good is this card? I think it's quite good. It doesn't work in harvest rounds, but there are enough of those, and if you have a sheep in a pasture, like, this is your entire grain source, and it gives you a fine read to point conversion already. I think Mineral Feeder is relatively good. Now, it is a little narrow. You do have to have a sheep in a pasture before you can start getting grain, and it might only throw you 2 grain throughout the game. But I don't think any part of this is bad. Like, it's just narrow. So, to me, that puts it in B tier, B- tier. Somewhere like that is fine, I think. The Mole Plow. 3 wood and a food as a cost. Play in round 9 or later. But you can use either farmland or cultivation and just get an extra field through the rest of the game. I think Mole Plow is pretty good. It is one of my preferred plows in Revised overall. You definitely want to be aiming to use it 3 times, but I think that's plenty doable. It doesn't work for, like, early Cultivator the same way Plowmaker does, so that there is that downside to it. You do have to be plowing your fields late when you play the Mole Plow, but I think that's not too annoying. You might want to be playing this in Stage 2 or Round 8 sometimes, and you can't, so it can be a little annoying in that circumstance. But unlike Swing Plow or Turn Rest Plow, it doesn't have an occupation prerequisite. You can play this with no occupations. Not that you'd really be in Round 9 with no occupations played, so I don't know if Turn Rest is a fair comparison, but Swing Plow, you know, the third oct can be annoying sometimes, right? So, I'm a fan of Mole Plow. I think it's pretty decent, especially because I'm expecting plows to be a little harder in some games. There will be some games with plenty of plow support, but there will also be games with very little plow support with such a big card pool. So I think it's worth picking Mole Plow relatively early. I do think it's a B+ kind of card. Yeah, let's say it's similar to Chain Float. Overhaul! Overhaul is Big Country's best friend. I'm not going to consider the existence of Big Country for the purposes of these ratings, but with Overhaul you can fence 12 spaces, plow once, play Big Country, and then play Overhaul, and that's just completely busted. Overhaul, in general, says you can pay 1 wood, pass this along, and fence 3, and change your fence arrangement. I think Overhaul's pretty good. Changing your fence arrangement in the mid or late game I think is pretty valuable. This can take you from partial fencing to full fencing. For example, fence 9 into fence 12 seems pretty good. Fence 12 into fence 15 seems pretty good with a passing miner. So I think overall, pretty solid card. I'm going to give it a B grade. Definitely has some good tactical benefits. The fact that it enables partial fencing early in a lot more strategies, I think, is a big benefit here. Hey, Ben, can that re-trigger Shepherd's Crook? Good question. Maybe? And I don't know if I'm supposed to be the one saying maybe when I'm like the editor of the compendium and all that, but I haven't looked into that. If Shepherd's Crook says build, I mean, Overhaul says rebuild. So if Shepherd's Crook says build, then I think the answer is probably yes, but I would have to research that a little more closely. But that would be a fun mini combo if it works to Shepherd's Crook and then recreate your 14 fences and trigger Shepherd's Crook again. I don't know. I do not know at all. Off the top of my head. So, maybe not quite as good as the renovation stuff, but definitely a solid card here, Overhaul. It's not an easy one to program. I'm honestly surprised, Acerbic, that y'all are even trying to program it. I would not have attempted this one, personally. I am surprised to see this as a potential in the set. So, caveats, as I've said a few times before during these tier list videos, we might not get all of these. It might not be a new pasture, Scott. I'm not, the discussions on BGG are not fresh in my head from that one. Alright, remodeling. It passes, it costs a food, and it gives you clay for each clay room and for each major. This card is pretty underwhelming. When are you going to need clay this badly when you're already in clay rooms? Not really. So I don't know when I'd really want to play remodeling. If I'm having a tough time taking clay off the board and I need 2 more for a reno and I have 2 majors. That's pretty narrow sounding to me. I think remodeling's pretty bad. Not really sure when I'd use it. Let me put it next to this other passing miner that gives clay. Rocky terrain lets you buy a stone for a food whenever you get another field. And it's not limited to field tiles. If you play bean field and have rocky terrain down, you can buy a stone. If you play field caretaker, you can buy a stone. So rocky terrain is pretty flexible as a stone source, and it only costs a food. I think you can do a lot of good things with rocky terrain, but as usual, you need to watch out to not overspend your food and kill your food tempo. So all the food caveats apply, as Agricola always forces you to think about. But rocky terrain, stone for a food, that's a really good trade. Think about the things you could do with extra stone in this set, mostly like sculpture course and major building, and some of these miners cost some stone. So I think rocky terrain's pretty solid. I would draft it relatively highly depending on what else is in the draft. Somewhere in the B tier, I think. Probably not too high in the B tier, maybe more towards the middle or the back. I'm having a little AP deciding where exactly this goes, but maybe ahead of Chick Stable is okay. Next is the stable yard, and the prereq is 3 stables and 3 pastures, so this is not an early game card at all. It is difficult to get the prereq for this one, but it is a point that doesn't cost anything, and you get a food for each complete round left to play. So it's like a point and 4 food or something like that, if in the better case scenarios. And at any time you can trade a sheep and a pig for a cow. I don't know if you're ever going to do that, But if you have a lot of early fencing and get some stables in there too, this is a point and some food for free. So it definitely has good upside. If this had no prereq, then this would be A tier. So what is the actual tier of this given the prereq? I think it's probably a C+, more or less. Day labor combo piece. Each time you day labor, you can put a food on the next 4 rounds. It costs a clay. I mean, if you want to be the Captain Day Labor, be my guest. I am not really going to play Stew too much. Like, is it worth tacking on to some other Day Labor combos? Maybe. But you don't really want to be taking start player just to play Stew onto your Day Labor combo. And a card that puts food on the next 4 you want more early than late. So I'm not convinced Stew's very good. I think it has to be a D tier card, honestly. A lot of times I see Stew played. People are overplaying their hand and not focusing enough on the board. Well, Stew gives you 12 if you use the Day Labors early enough. But if you Day Labor in round 11, you only get food on the next 3. Because there's no round 15. I am a Stew hater. We're putting it in D tier if you're listening to me. The Teacher's Desk requires an Ock, costs a wood, and lets you play Ox for a food each time you use Major or Reno Major, which is house redevelopment. Now, you probably want to use those spaces relatively often, or at least in total, I would expect my games to take, three times on average. I'd go to those spaces 3 times on average. And, if you're getting 3 Ox for 3 food and a wood and half an action, that's a pretty good deal. So don't underrate the Teacher's Desk. If you get 2 occupations out of it, then you paid half an action to play this card, 1 wood and 2 food for 2 occupation actions. I think that's pretty solid. I think the downside on this card is still pretty high. It has a high floor. So I think I'm going to put it in the B tier, or B plus tier. That said, I think I haven't played this card enough. Based on my evaluation of it right there, I should be playing this card more. Now, where exactly in the B tier do I want to put it? Roughly in the middle. The Trellis is free, it requires 2 Ox, and lets you fence right before you take Pig Market. So, it has tactical benefits, it gives you an extra fence action. Like, having Trellis played makes it very difficult to fence block you, because how often is Pig Market going to be contested early? Not super often. So, taking a pig and building fences right before, and I mean, that's tactical goodness right there. Trellis can be a lifesaver. It can be tactical fencing in the mid-game easily. It lets you fence multiple times with an official build fences action for combo purposes. So I think Trellis has a lot of good uses. I don't think its ceiling is super high. Like, you are just making fences more open for everyone else. Taking the pig market space too much can't really be that much of a good thing. So B tier, B minus probably. Yeah, similar to credit maybe. And I'm looking at Abort Oriel and I'm thinking, yeah, I mean the upside's pretty high, honestly. Does that combo with Furnisher? Which one are you talking about, CW? I don't think I understand, so I'm just gonna move on. Sorry. Okay. Woodslide Hammer is a conservator if you're on 5 wood rooms, and it gives you a 2-stone discount. Wood slide hammer, really, really, really good. How many times are you going to do 5 room strategies? Like, kind of often. This lets you skip an entire reno. It gives you a 2-stone discount on reno, and it only costs a wood. I don't really know what the designers were thinking when they created this card. I don't know how it survived the C-Deck playtesting, except for small sample size. But Wood Slide Hammer, pretty silly. I think you should draft this card very highly. It is a ton of value. I think we're S-tiering this one. I have to drag it twice. Now, compared to other S-tier things, it's probably better than Greening Plan. Probably similar to Kettle. If you want to put it... I think I'm going to put it above Kettle. Like, sometimes your strategy doesn't involve Wood Slide Hammer, but Wood Slide Hammer is definitely enough to build a game around. So, yeah. I'm gonna say it's too strong. Oh my god, one more sec, sorry. Okay. Next card is Woodcraft. Each time you use a wood space and have at most 5 wood in your supply, you get a food. Woodcraft to me is a free miner that you might get 2 food out of throughout the game. It's very underwhelming. You know, if you have nothing else to play, then it's definitely worth a tiny bit. But you really don't want to be hunting Woodcraft procs throughout your game, because you don't want to be hunting situations where you take wood and have at most 5 wood in your supply. That's just not a good situation to be in, unless you just built a room or just fenced. So, Woodcraft, pretty low value in my opinion. Like, stew-ish. Okay, we have a strong one here, the writing boards. You immediately get 1 wood for each Ock you have in front of you. It's a passing miner, it costs a food. This warps the game, it's bad design. This one also passed through a small amount of playtesting, a too small amount of playtesting on Play Agricola. If you play an Ock-heavy game, you can get like a 4-wood passing miner in Stage 3, a 5-wood passing miner in Stage 4, something like that. Draft this highly, abuse it while you can. If the community wanted Crosscut Wood banned, I have to imagine writing boards gets banned also. In overall strength, I think I need to put it pretty much the same as Excursion to the Quarry, which puts a lot of stone into the game as a passing miner, also warps the economy. Alright, and that ends our adventure in the C-Deck miners, and now we finish off the D-Deck that we started at the beginning of this Minor Improvements tier list. We're almost there! We're almost done with this tier list. Alright, Pellet Press costs 2 clay, and you pay a reed to get food on the next 4 rounds. I've never really been impressed with Pellet Press. I do think BMW is just way superior as a way to convert reed, and I think someone mentioned that for Elephant Grass also. It costs 2 clay. I don't really see myself playing Pellet Press too often unless I see a lot of reed in the draft and expect to have extra clay after playing 2 Ox and then playing this card. You're just not going to get too much, like too many chances to get full 4-round benefit out of this reed. So I think this card is pretty weak. I'm going to put it in the D tier. It doesn't give you a point. Yeah, very much like Stew. You don't actually want to take the time to set this up. Petrified Wood lets you change 3 wood to a stone each. So it adds stone to the game, takes a bit of wood out of the game, is a passing miner. I think 3 is a little heavy in terms of design choice. I much rather would have liked to see this card be worth up to 2 times. I think that would be a lot more calm and balanced in terms of design, but, you know, it's D-Deck. I think designers cared a lot less when making the cards in D-Deck, and compared to other things to complain about, Petrified Wood didn't make the cut as complaint-worthy during D-Deck playtesting. So, how strong is it? It's decent. Having extra wood is not really a common theme throughout any Agricola game that I play. There's always a good use for wood. Sometimes Petrified Wood can be really helpful in a late-game Reno queue, so be aware of that. But I think this is just, like, on average, a decent card. So, B- maybe. It definitely can be really strong. It can definitely warp games if people are just like, hey, I want to do this now. Yeah, similar to Rocky Terrain seems fine. Pig Swill costs a grain or 2 food, and each time you take fencing, you get a boar. So you have to ask yourself, how many times are you taking fencing, and do you want to trade 2 food or a grain for that many boar? I think there are so many better ways to get boar that I don't know if I'm ever paying this much to play Pig Swill. I think this card is straight up bad. Yeah, I'm never playing this card. I'm never playing this. Or at least I'm never drafting it. Like, it enables Truffle Slicer. But it's really expensive. And Truffle Slicer doesn't start until later. And there are just so many good ways to get boar, and this is not one of them. Okay, here we have the Reap Hook. It costs a wood, and it is just straight up better than Granary. You're almost guaranteed to get 3 grain off of the Reap Hook, and heck, if you play Reap Hook in round 12, you still get 2 grain out of this. I don't know what design choices led to the Reap Hook, but Reap Hook is really strong. It's definitely A tier to me. The fact that it only costs a wood, I don't care if it doesn't give me a point like Granary does. The flexibility of when you're getting this grain is awesome. You'll notice that these are just the next 3 harvest rounds. So it lets you sow during a harvest round. This is really good, right? Is it S tier? I don't know if it's S tier, but it's definitely mid to high A tier. Yeah, that feels fine. It's really good. Don't pass the Reap Hook if you don't have to. Yep, agreed with y'all in chat here. Well, Sid, yeah, I think my S tier is a little too thin, and my A tier might be a little too thin too. I think at the end of this video, and after I rate the last 7 miners here, I'm gonna slide quite a few things up. The next card is Rolling Pin. In the returning home phase of each round, if you have more clay than wood in your supply, you get a food. When are you going to have more clay than wood in your supply? You're building clay rooms, or you have rammed clay. Or you just built fences. How often does that happen? How many rounds are going to qualify for that? Do you want to sink a wood into the ability to get that many extra food? No, this is just way too narrow to be good. And even when it's good, you turn a wood into, what, 5 to 8 food? This is D tier. What else gives you very underwhelming amounts of food here? Brewing water? Yeah. Next card is Small Basket. Each time you use Reed Bank, and we're only going to talk about the 4-player situation, you put a Reed back on the space and get a veggie. Pretty flexible. I don't think putting Reed on Reed Bank is that big of a deal by the time you want vegetables. You don't really want to trigger this in stage 1 because then you're giving good room parts to other players, but by the mid-game, I think you're going to see the Reed stack, you know, get pretty big sometimes, and in that case, like, restarting the Reed stack at 2 isn't a big deal. So I think Small Basket has a lot of good mid-game uses. I would recommend drafting it somewhere in the middle of most drafts, especially if you don't have another veg source. If you do have other veg sources, you probably don't need Small Basket. So, I don't know, like a B- maybe? Chord Maker combo. Ooh, Chord Maker. Yeah, fun Chord Maker combo, fun Nest Site combo, but not too often a combo piece. So let's call this a B-. This is a fairly good veg source. It's not a top tier veg source, but it's good. BMW combo, yeah. Alright, the storeroom is kind of expensive. It costs 2 stone and a wood, which, you know, that's not trivial at all, but it does give you a point back. And at the end of the game, if you have a crop game, it's 2 or 3 points. So, I think you want to treat this like a loom that doesn't give you food and is more expensive. And instead of collecting sheep, you just want to make sure you have a strong crop game. There are lots of ways to have pretty strong crop games. It makes your 5th veg worth, like, a point sometimes. Expensive sickle, yeah, for those of you who know the original version of the game, it's very much an expensive sickle. Yeah, rounding up, I agree, is a weird design choice. This is going to give a fair amount of bonus points anyway. You didn't need to round it up, Uwe. Pretty solid card. I think B tier or B+ tier. You could argue for A- even because the ceiling is pretty high. 6-pointer, says Gray yesterday. What? 9 grade 9 veggies? That's insane. But yeah, storeroom has some pretty good ceiling. I don't know if I can put it higher than a B+ because the cost is significant. But watch out for situations where it can go off. And I don't recommend passing this too much, especially if you've seen a lot of crop sources in your game. You can play it late? Yeah. You can absolutely play this in round 14. Trout pool. At the start of each work phase, if there are at least 3 food on fishing, you get a food. Cost 2 play, gives you a point, gives you, I don't know, 3 to 7 food during the game. I think trout pool is fine. I've played it a couple times myself, never really regretted it, but, you know, sometimes you just don't have the 2 play to spend on it. I think it's solid. I don't think it's more than a little solid, so probably a C+ to me here. You know, actually, how does it compare to Chicken Coop? It doesn't cost the read. You're not sure when you're getting the 3 to 7 food off of it, but you are going to net about the same, and it is still going to be a dribble of food. You know, I think... But how many times are people going to go for fishing combos? Let's put this towards the back of B tier, but if you want to call it C tier, I'm not going to argue with you. Alright, the trowel. Why does this card exist? Why does this card exist? You can turn your house from wood to stone at any time for a reed stone food per room, or you can just get your clay to stone reno for a reed discount. I mean, I think trowel's pretty good. It definitely enables Freemason stuff very easily. I mean, in general, Stonehouse strats, playing Trowel instead of going on a Reno space can be worth the extra read and food that this costs. So I think Trowel has ridiculously high upside, pretty good downside. Like, when are you not going to want to, like, have your Stone Reno already played as a miner that only costs a wood, and even save a read in the worst case? You think Freemason is the only card this is nuts with? Manservant, yeah. I think there's enough. I think there's enough to be disappointed in. And just the fact that you're saving the Reno actions is worth something. So, I don't see this being worse than B+. It's definitely breakable. I think I'm going to give this an A-. Just because the combo potential is too ridiculous. Similar to Mandolin in that respect. The combo potential is just too ridiculous. Bad design. At least, according to me. Wholesale market. Costs 2 wood, 2 veg. Gives you 3 food. 3 points, I should say. And a food on each remaining round space. So this... Wait a second. Isn't this... I saw the cost on BGA as 1 wood, 2 veg. Might be a bug there. But the printed version that I've seen is 2 wood, 2 veg. It gives you 3 points. So that's kind of like a fair trade for your wood and vegetables into points. And it gives you some food bonus. But in a lot of games, you don't want to be investing too early in this. So I think the cost is a big trap in a lot of games. There will be the odd game where wholesale market is really good, where you do have the extra veg that you need to convert into points. It's definitely better than Schnapps Distillery in terms of turning 5th and 6th vegetables into points. But... is it much better than that? I don't know. Rarely? Rarely? You think it's awful, but probably playable because of the revised economy? Yeah, what I'm thinking is that there are enough situations in the revised economy you can make this playable. So, you know, C- maybe for me? Better than Schnapps Distillery? I do think it's better than Schnapps Distillery, but a lot of people overrate Schnapps Distillery. It's got to be better than interim storage. Maybe? No, maybe it doesn't. I think it's similar to Elephant Grass Plant. Like, maybe in the right game it has big upside, but most of the time, no. And the last card for these tier lists. I am so glad to be done dropping these into buckets. It's the Wood and Whey bucket. When you take Sheep Market, you can build a stable for a wood. When you take Cattle Market, you can build a stable for free. Now, these discounts come with an upfront cost of a wood and a food, so that's not great. In some games, this can be good. In most games, it's going to be, you know, blah, I'm saving a tiny bit of wood during the game. I don't see this being too good. Probably a C- card for me. Like, turns wood into trivial things, like tasting or mill wheel. Yeah, okay. So, with that, I have finally dropped all of the cards from the new set and works in progress into tiers. Now to do a sanity check on the minor improvements, just like I did with the occupations. Having only 4 miners in the S tier does feel wrong. Yeah, I think you're not going to use Sheep Market and Cattle Market enough, and the upfront cost is annoying. Because you're not getting... If you build a first stable on Sheep Market, you're not saving wood on the stable. You're saving actions, but I don't know, like, overusing these spaces doesn't seem to happen too much to me. But yeah, feel free to prove me wrong. I expect to be proven wrong for a few of these, honestly. I'm only going to claim that my overall grade on this tier list is probably in the 85 to 90% range, which I hope is still good content for you all out there. Wood and Whey, we're done with Wood and Whey bucket. So, Fodder Chamber, Brick Hammer, Brewery Pond, Reap Hook, Baseboard, Scales. How many of these are actually S tier? I think I'm going to move fodder chamber and brewery pond into the S tier. Keep beer table at the back of S tier because it's kind of hard to do right. Actually, no. It's not that hard to do right. Fodder chamber is just, like, way too potentially strong. You think scales is S tier? I'm not sure about scales. It's very good, but I don't know. You're fair to put it in S tier if you want, but I don't think it's better than high A. Potter's Yard isn't getting added? I don't think so. Potter's Yard is like a nightmare to code, isn't it? Early food? Sure, Sid, sometimes. Okay, so then the A tier, Brickhammer, Repook, Scales, Baseboards, Bucksaw, Clubhouse, Debt Security, Writing Boards, Excursion to the Quarry, Reed Belt, Muddy Puddles, Trowel. Yeah, that all seems fine. Can I put Harvest House into A tier? Sure, I can put Harvest House into A minus. I'll put Beating Rod and Gift Basket into A minus. Hauberg, I think, is a little too tricky to play to be that good. Forest Stone Hawk, these are all very good, but sure. No, Hawk Tower is not an A minus. It's an interesting, like, way to try to combine gut feel with direct comparisons and indirect comparisons to other stuff. But we have a lot of stuff in the B tier. The top part of it is mostly can be busted, but usually good. I think I'm okay with most of this here. I'm not going to worry about the ordering within these big clumps too much, but just generally if they're at the beginning, it's towards a plus. If they're at the end, it's towards a minus. PDR Christianity, these all seem like C's to me. Forest Laycut, yeah, that's fine. Are all of these B minuses? Yeah, I think they're mostly B minuses. Are all of these cards C minuses? It's pretty close to that. Are all of these D pluses? I think that's fair. Now, F tier probably can get a little bigger. This gives you 2 food immediately. I don't know if I'm ever playing Corf. I don't want to put a family growth card into F. Farmyard Manure is probably an F. I think I'm gonna put it here. One thing you think about this format is we'll see round 1 starts. Yeah, I think that's fair. Seeing all the cards like this becomes how obvious how few of these give victory points. Yes, a lot of these give farming benefits, but if you look for direct points and bonus points, they are not common. They are not common. Yeah, I agree Brewery Pond is a fantastic grain source. Point Ox, I think so. You like Pellet Press. You got 20 food in a small house game. Okay, interesting. I guess a small house game makes some sense for Pellet Press. I'll buy that, but I don't know if I can put it above D tier for that. Yeah, Triple Lines, we're expecting most of these, if not all of them, to make it into BGA. Definitely the caveat that the developers are still working on a few of these. There might be some bugs that are too cumbersome to work through, but yeah. So that wraps up our adventure into the occupations and minor improvement tier lists. Thanks all very much for sticking with me throughout these 3 streams. It took a lot of time to get these done, but here's the link to the minor improvements if you want to make one yourself. And the link to the occupations one is here. Go ahead and make one of these yourself. And maybe we can click view community rank and see how we all think of these together. If any of you creators out there want to make one yourself and make a video out of that, I'd be more than happy to watch it and make a comparison video or debate stuff. But for now, that's all for me. I do have work in a few minutes, so yeah. Let's check if there's anyone to raid here. I'm not seeing anything. But yeah, I'll be back with a game tomorrow, hopefully. Yep, we'll get back on those games, Acerbic, but I did want to make sure I got these done. So yeah, take care, everyone. See y'all tomorrow or next week or sometime in the future. Bye.